Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being on time. Welcome to the second series of our Dignity in Practice learning events. Today, we're going to be focusing on improving the cash offer. Please make sure you feel comfortable, have a cup of tea or coffee with you, grab a notebook. If possible, please switch your phones off so you can be present in the next hour and a half or 2 hours for those that will stay to continue the discussion about ending the need for food bank consultation. Please make sure that you are on mute, and please do use the chat if you want to ask a question or make a comment. I would like to ask you to write your name and the name of your organization on your room name, just so people know what organizations you are representing today. Thank you. Chelsea, can we go to the next slide? So this event series has been developed in partnership with the Poverty Truth community and a Dignity Advisory team who represent the experiences of people facing food insecurity and community organizations working to respond to these challenges. I would like to really thank you for filling out the Eventbrite form. We know it takes a bit of time, and we appreciate everyone taking the time to fill in this form. The information that you provide help us to understand your interest in the topic, where you're coming from, and why you're joining us today. We want this session to be as interactive as possible. So throughout the next hour and a half, we're going to be using Menti to capture your reflections. So if you wouldn't mind, can you please go to www.menti.com and type the code 44128050. If accessing Menti is not possible for you, you can also use the chat instead. So I wondered, Diana, if you can share the Menti so we can see what people are saying. So who is with us today? What kind of sector are you coming from? Whether you're coming from a voluntary sector, community sector, local authority. It will be great to, if we were in a room together, we will be finding this information by shaking hands and talking to people. So it's nice to see who is in the room today. So, yeah, there is a wide range of experience in the room today, which is amazing. Can I ask people to mute themselves, please?
There's a third sector and a voluntary in the chat as well.
Wonderful, thank you, Caroline. Yeah, a wide range of expertise, and it's really encouraging to have so many councils today as well. All key actors in responding to food insecurity. Amazing. But, when we were thinking about organizing these events, initially we thought, would we invite like 30 people to the space? However, 90 registered for this event today, which shows the demand and interest in the sector to actually support our communities with financial support and work together to reduce the need for emergency food aid. And obviously this has become a real priority for us all. It shows also that we're building a momentum where food banks are not acceptable anymore. And we all need to work together with the support of the government to create the change our communities need. And we'd like to know where people are coming from, what local authority you are joining us from in the next question. Moray? Yay, Glasgow, Edinburgh, South Lanarkshire, Perth and Kinross, Renfrewshire, Fife, Lothian, Argyll and Bute, Dundee, West Dunbartonshire, North Lancashire, They're all moving.
There is Falkirk as well.
Falkirk, yes, I can see that now.
Pelt.
West Lothian.
Pelt.
Oh, we have people from London as well, and Southwark. Wonderful. We have almost all Scotland in the room, which is fantastic. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here today.
There is Highland.
Highlands, and I think in the chat somebody says Scottish Borders. So yeah, lovely to have you all here today. Now, may I please introduce you to Ellie, oh sorry, Ellie, I hope I pronounced your second name correctly, Kontoravis from the Policy Led for Tackling Food Insecurity at the Scottish Government. Ellie, I'll pass the floor for you now.
Super. Thank you so much, Irina. Thank you, Nourish, and the Poverty Truth community and wider partners for hosting this learning event series and inviting the Scottish Government to participate. I'll keep this contribution brief because we're really interested in hearing from you and in taking part in these discussions. So if I could just go to the next slide, please. I wanted to take a moment just to reiterate what the challenge is. And exactly as Irina said, it is quite a significant challenge, but it is one that we have all some power to do something about. And this discussion is extremely relevant and timely. So you'll all already be aware of many of the factors here, so I won't say too much, just to summarize that the thing that drives food insecurity is insufficient and insecure incomes. And in Scotland, the latest data that we have suggests that around 8% of people are impacted, but prevalence is much higher in some groups. Often, a referral to a food bank is the simplest and quickest route to support someone. And that is something that we are trying to turn on its head, really through cash first support and by improving the cash offer, as this discussion today will discuss further. At the same time, the horizon does look challenging. So the loss of key income supports and the rising cost of living would suggest that this winter and the months after that are going to be really tough for families. So it's really important that we recognize the specifics of the time that we're in just now. That said, we also have quite a considerable opportunity. So from a policy perspective, the Scottish Government has made a commitment to eradicating poverty, and that has been escalated to a national priority and one that involves all of us. And when we're thinking specifically about the issue of food insecurity, over the last 5 or 6 years, the Scottish Government's approach has evolved in such a way that it's really grounded in human rights. So that means that we focus on preventing poverty, and when hardship occurs, promote cash first and dignified responses. There's also a real opportunity here in terms of practice, and everyone around the table will be aware of the challenges that the pandemic threw up, but also the momentum and the ways of working that evolved out of that, which gives us a real opportunity to start to do things slightly differently. So a quick note on cash first approaches in practice. In Scotland, the Scottish Welfare Fund is our primary source of cash first support when an income crisis occurs. But there are lots of other discretionary supports in place too, often tailored to local authority areas. And there are lots and lots of other interventions that sit alongside that too. So the Independent Food Aid Network's cash first referral leaflets do a really good job of summarizing that landscape in 20 areas now, and that's expanding. And money advice is also a really important part of that landscape, money and debt advice. I wanted to highlight the flexible funding that's been in place over 2020-21 and in this winter as well. So that has enabled a lot of cash first responses and enhancements to the cash first offer in local areas. There's flexible funding that enables local authorities to tailor interventions to meet local needs. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from a couple of the local authority partners and community organisations that are here today as well on how that flexible funding has enabled the evolution and the creation of new interventions, as well as the bolstering of existing interventions. I won't say too much, but I'm sure you'll have heard of the flexible food funds in place in Moray and in Argyll and Bute. Cash First is also at the centre of our consultation on a draft national plan to end the need for food banks. So on the 20th of April, the Scottish Government published a draft national plan and consultation process. And that is open until the 25th of January. We're doing a lot of work alongside that online consultation to hear directly from people with lived experience of food insecurity and people in groups with higher prevalence of food insecurity. So please do share that link and share this opportunity. The draft national plan for our strategic framework for food insecurity, which has Cash First embedded at the heart of it. It outlines some new commitments. It also invites further suggestions. So it's very much presented as a collaborative opportunity to develop policy here. And I'd just like to leave you with a few further reflections.
Are you breaking up a bit, Ellie?
I'm not sure if you can hear me. If Anna, who's changing the slides, would it be possible to go to that one, please? Thank you very much. Okay. So a few final reflections then to inform our discussion today. Of being person-led, we'd be really interested in understanding, what do people with direct experience think of cash? What are the outcomes that this way of working has? So not just income maximization, but wider well-being measures. The second consideration is what's the best place to locate.
Ellie, I'm really sorry, but we're not able to hear you properly. And I'm not sure whether you can hear me saying that to you. I wonder if, in the meantime, since this was Ellie's last slide, I might just ask her to add anything else in the chat, if that's okay. And I just want to say thank you so very much. We got most of the presentation. I really appreciate it. And of course, you had it up on the slides. If there are any questions that you have for Ellie, please do feel free to pop them in the chat at the moment. So if that's okay, I'm going to just shift us on. But thank you very much for coming to contribute, Ellie. So I wanted to start our discussion today with just a reminder about why it is that we're here doing this work with our partners in the Dignity in Practice project. So it's just having to worry about whether you can afford the food that you and your family need to be healthy and well is inherently in opposition to the principles of dignity and human rights. We know that it's the government's responsibility to realize the right to food, and we also know that everybody has a role to play in helping people to access financial support that is available. No part of the system will be able to end the need for charitable food aid on its own, but it's clear that people across Scotland are committed to doing everything possible to move towards a future where everyone can afford the food that keeps them healthy and well. The first part of the learning event series, sorry, can we just make sure everybody's on mute, please? Is that better? Deanna, can you just make sure everybody's on mute? Thank you. Great. So the first part of the learning event series is about promoting dignity and choice through financial support, because we know that people are facing food insecurity, not because of a lack of food in Scotland, but because of a lack of money to afford the food that they need. And so these two events are bringing together examples from across Scotland where people are working together to make it easier for people to access existing support and work creatively at a local level to establish, expand, or enhance the kinds of support that are available to people. So last week we discussed strategies to lower the barriers for people in accessing existing financial grants and entitlements. This is about refocusing all of our efforts towards to help organizations and services to build tools, knowledge, and skills to empower frontline staff and volunteers to help people to navigate the system and access existing support. But we also know that cash support makes the greatest difference to people's ability to afford the food that they need when it's integrated into wider advice and support options, and where interventions are designed with dignity and choice at their heart. So today we'll be hearing about examples where local authorities have worked with community and third sector partners to establish new forms of financial assistance, strengthen and enhance existing options, including by integrating advice and wider support when someone applies for something, and working collaboratively to develop and improve schemes to fit the needs of people in their area. So there are many examples we can draw on, and here are just a few of the things that local authorities have been doing over the past now nearly 2 years of pandemic responses that have taken us closer to what Ellie was describing in the vision of a cash first response to financial insecurity. So we have things like direct payments of free school meal replacement schemes, expanding eligibility of free school meal payments to new groups of people that maybe weren't under previous thresholds or fell below previous thresholds, direct winter hardship payments that went out last year, grants being distributed through partners in the energy advice sector, and a whole range of different types of approaches that we can draw on and continue to reflect on and continue to learn from, and that are taking place right across the country. As Ellie mentioned, there's a new fund now that local authorities are currently grappling with. What are we going to put in place to support people this winter? And things are increasingly difficult for people on the ground. And we know that there are lots of models and examples that are possible for people to draw on as we move forward. We have an opportunity in the coming weeks and months to build on the learning from these initiatives and embed those into new practice. We're going to share the guiding principles for this fund in the chat just now. But the purpose of this is to enable local authorities to support well-being by preventing and responding to financial insecurity. There's an emphasis on cash first approaches, the flexibility to use the funding to promote and strengthen delivery of Scottish Welfare Fund, for example, and encouragement of proactive approaches, especially for groups who have intersectional needs. Before we get on to the panel discussion, I just want to briefly touch on one example. I know there are loads that we could be offering, but Fuel Well Dundee was developed in close partnership with the Dundee Fighting for Fairness Commissioners. And I just want to draw attention to what that has looked like, because by working really closely with people with direct experience of food insecurity or fuel insecurity or poverty, what we've seen is changes and adaptations to the payment amount that Dundee City Council were originally proposing, and changes and modifications to the website in terms of wording, the questions that are posed to people, the process someone might go through. And now that they've been thinking about, now that they've relaunched the scheme for this year, they've been working again with the commissioners to think about what kinds of, how do we review the progress from last year and what sorts of changes might be necessary. So it's just an example of how, one example of where working alongside people who have experience can really help to enhance and improve the design and delivery of a service. So at our panel discussion today, we're delighted to be joined by Norma Matheson from Moray Council, Jane Jones from Argyll and Bute Council, and Julie Semple from Bute Advice Centre. And we're going to be hearing about the flexible food funds that operate in both Moray and Argyll and Bute. They operate slightly differently, but they draw on learning from each other. And it's just really great to hear from the group of, from the three of them, to be able to flesh out what we can learn from them. We've chosen these schemes as an example to help understand the qualities and features and ingredients that others might be able to use or adapt to their local circumstances. So after a short break, we'll then come back into breakout rooms so that you all can start discussing what kinds of things came out of the discussion with the panel members and what's inspired you around creative responses that might be possible elsewhere in your local areas. After our small group discussions, we'll take a look at the Scottish Government's consultation that Ellie was just talking about in terms of the new national plan for ending the need for food banks as a primary response. We'll end the event formally at 12:30 as promised, but everybody is welcome to join us for another half hour where we go a little bit more deeply into the consultation discussion, and so that you've got a bit of time to speak to each other and to reflect on some of the questions and maybe start to think about how you might prepare your own response. So without any further ado, I'm really pleased to introduce Annie Mccormick, who's the chair of Broken Up Broken in Perth and Kinross. Annie is going to introduce our panel speakers. So thank you very much, Annie. I will pass it over to you.
Thanks so much, Chelsea, and thanks to Nourish and the Poverty Truth Commission community for letting us have this discussion today. So yeah, like you were saying, the three panel members have put together some amazing projects, flexible projects and cash first projects. So we're going to be hearing from them today directly. So first off is Norma Matheson. She's Benefits Manager for Moray Council. And in April 2020, Norma and her team established Moray Council's Flexible Food Fund with the additional funding received from the Scottish Government to respond to food insecurity at the start of the pandemic. That was delivered directly by Money Advice Moray, which was the council's in-house advice team, and gave up to 2 monthly payments, which were awarded alongside wider advice and support. And the fund aimed to provide people with freedom of choice and dignity as part of a cash first approach. And then we're going to also hear from Julie Semple, who's manager at Bute Advice Centre. Hi, Julie. As manager of Bute Advice Centre and coordinator of the Argyll and Bute Community Food Forum, Julie has had a central role in creating and delivering the Flexible Food Fund project. It was established in January of this year, and the Flexible Food Fund project has supported nearly 750 households to access more than £1 million through advice, grants, rebates and benefits, which is amazing. She also worked with Jane Jones, who's here today as well. Hi, Jane. Jane is the commercial manager for Argyll and Bute Council and was the food fund lead for Argyll and Bute Council during the pandemic. And was a member of the Scottish Government's Social Renewal Advisory Board's Food Circle. She is the National Chair of Assist FM, which represents the 32 Scottish local authorities for all matters relating to catering, cleaning and facilities management services. So thanks so much to all three of you today. Really excited to get lots of learning going today, and I'm going to be putting aside everything that I know. I'm excited to learn all the new things that you guys have been doing. And I know being the first at doing anything is no fun. So I'm excited to hear particularly what the motivation was for you guys about doing this new approach. If I could start with Norma, about what your motivation was for the project. You're on mute, Norma. FYI.
Hi there, everybody. Thanks very much for being invited to join you all today and speak about what we did in Moray. I think the motivation really there was, it was down to really just, you know, at the very start of the pandemic, and it was back in April, May last year when we put together the food fund and we were thinking about what we were going to need. And we worked closely in partnership with the Moray Food Plus, the food bank in Moray. And I know Mary's here today, and we knew that they were absolutely going to be swamped with referrals for food packages for people over the pandemic. So we really wanted to look at an alternative approach to that, so that people had choice in terms of whether they had dignity as well, because obviously there's still a certain stigma around accessing food banks and around that. So we want to offer, basically was to offer choice. It was to offer an alternative approach for people and to support them with financial insecurity along with that. So we were able to offer, we put together a flexible food fund, And because it was administered from within our Money Advice Moray team, they were also able to offer a cash first approach along with money advice, income maximisation, statutory and non-statutory debt support as well. So it was a package of support as well as the actual monetary payment.
Amazing. It just sounds amazing, collaborative working, sounds so exciting. And can I ask Julie, can you tell us a bit about your motivation, because it's interesting to see coming from two different areas where the similarities are.
And thank you so much for having me. I apologise. I think there's a lorry sitting out on the street, so if there's a lot of background noise, I'm sorry about that. Yeah, the motivation for us was back in December 2019, we set up the Argyll and Bute Community Food Forum, bringing food banks together, not to manage them, they were all doing that independently themselves, but just to give them an opportunity to get together to share experience, especially for those that were just kernels of an idea at that time. It wasn't until September 2020 that the food banks approached me and said, you know, the relationship that Bute Advice had with our local food bank, they wanted that replicated across the whole region. And we thought, well, do you know what? We're doing things over the phone at the moment. It's not face to face. So actually we could do that. And we went to the council. Now, it just happened to be that the timing was great, because at that time, Jane and Fergus were looking at the pot of money they had. And so it was just a fantastic marriage. So we had this collaboration. The food banks were desperate for support other than just a food parcel to be given. They wanted a cash first approach. That was hugely important to them. And we wanted that for them too. And obviously from the client gain that we have achieved so far, we can see that the pot of money that we get through the Flexible Food Fund, it's about 5 times that comes in from the other things that we're able to do. And a huge part of that was also working in collaboration with Ali Energy, our partner. That was at the request of the food banks, but we were delighted. They've always been one of our trusted partners. So it was welfare rights, it was money advice, and it was energy advice. And it was all rolled into one with the council, with all the partners working incredibly smoothly for a new project. It's amazing how well it's worked.
Amazing. Julie, Jane, do you want to come in from your point of view there? It'd be great.
Yes, Annie, hopefully my connection will stay on and you can hear what I'm saying. But yeah, from the council's perspective, we approached this slightly differently in the initial stages of the pandemic. As that initial emergency phase started to emerge and people in our communities were told to stay at home, our first response was to develop a multi-agency caring for people group, and meeting people's food needs was a critical stand of that. So we established a community food project at the same time Norma established her work. And that had several work streams, including developing free school meal replacements. And our initial response when people were told not to travel, not to leave their homes, and supermarket shelves were empty, I'm sure we all remember that, was to work with businesses and suppliers across Argyll and Bute to really just meet people's direct food needs. And that was for a period of time delivering food to doorsteps. We knew that that was needed because our food banks were also inundated with requests for help, and we developed really close ties with them and with Julie through that time. There were other things though that we were doing that were cash first approaches in a smaller scale. So we were doing things like funding purchasing cards to provide bespoke needs and responses in our communities, and our community groups have those cards and can purchase on behalf of people. We introduced cash payments for free school meals at the earliest opportunity where that was appropriate to do so. But we had that food first approach because the immediate pressure on us was tackling the challenges across that rural area where food itself was sparse and hard to get hold of. But as we began to move out of that emergency response situation, we wanted to develop an appropriate and suitable cash first solution. As Julie said, Fergus and I were kind of weighing up different options and opportunities to do that and meet the needs of the households in our areas. And that includes obviously our island communities. So that was at the time when Julie and the Community Food Forum were having the same thoughts and the same discussions, and we joined that together and worked as a collective group with our food banks. Now, some of the work that they did in the early stages was fantastic. So they've been working with the Independent Food Aid Network to develop the Worrying About Money leaflets. So as we ended our food parcel deliveries, we were able to include those leaflets in our deliveries. So we were able to kind of transition people from one form of support, if you like, to others. And because we were aware of the excellent work Norma was doing with her colleagues in Moray, we wanted to learn from that and build a bespoke and appropriate response in Argyll and Bute that met the needs of our communities. As Julie outlined, it was very much a partnership approach, and there was a lot of good timing around how that came together. It did take us time to get over that hurdle, but the big thing for us was about not being entrenched in what we were doing as being the only way to do things. So the one kind of current message or a consistent message throughout our response was to change and adapt as was appropriate. And even our flexible food fund itself has continued to change and adapt since it was established.
Amazing. I'm so glad that you mentioned the Worrying About Money leaflets as well. I know Sabine's here and they're an amazing tool. Yeah. And it's great to hear partnership and collaboration, like all these words that we know work and we can learn from over the pandemic. If I can ask you to maybe have a chat about the most significant change, and maybe I know like the figures of 250 households and £1 million is really attractive to focus on, but I'd love to hear about the kind of human elements and feedback that you got from people who you worked with. Norma, if I can swing back to you to have a chat about that.
Yeah, I mean, the human element was obviously one of the most important things of it. I am completely, and it was really about, you know, having regard to what people needed there and then. And we thought when we developed the Flexible Food Fund, we had a really good consideration. I also managed Scottish Welfare Fund, so we had a really good consideration about how the two schemes could sort of run together, and you know, and be possibly paid together in some cases and paid separately as well. So obviously Scottish Welfare Fund is there to meet an immediate financial crisis, and the money can be paid out, you know, for that short term. However, you know, the Flexible Food Fund was around a contribution towards food costs. It was based on kind of monthly payment, and so it was kind of to provide a kind of wider safety net there for families. And we had last year, actually, we had kind of 2 tranches of Scottish Government payments, and we kind of created a kind of summer scheme and a winter scheme for just ease of reference. And in both times, we had in excess of 700 households in Moray access the Flexible Food Fund over the summer period, and then again over the winter period as well. And this year, so far, obviously, we haven't come to the end of the financial year yet, but we're already have paid out money to in excess of another 700 households. And we've also done quite a bit of looking at, you know, whether is it the same households that have applied each time, you know, so that gives us an idea of, you know, how well people are managing with the money, and also when we are actually factoring in, you know, to their circumstances, what the support needs that they have with income maximisation and money advice and debts and things like that. You know, are they coming back to us each time? Are they getting the benefits from that service? And, you know, and also, unfortunately, we haven't got a magic wand to wave for, you know, some people, and it was a difficult time, you know, across the country for a lot of people. So, and we certainly found that there was a proportion of families that were coming back to us, but those between the summer and the winter period last year, they were only about a quarter of those families that actually came back, and we've still to analyse this year's figures as well. So obviously we were providing, you know, a kind of reasonable element of support there, and you know, when you work with families around money advice and income maximisation, it's not a one-hit wonder. You have these people basically on your books sometimes for years, and you work with them for a very long time. So it was really important to establish those connections with people and build those relationships, because that's what makes money advice services really actually work. And also word of mouth, you know, if somebody's had a good experience with the money advice service, you know, that they can say to somebody else, you know, that really helped them. And quite often we have feedback from them that it's actually changed their lives, saved their lives, it's brought them back from the brink. So the money is something that tries to help people, support people in that journey to us supporting them better with their, you know, maximising incomes and reducing their debt. So it's a kind of safety net in that journey. So we've had really good response back from people who've accessed the service, and you know, people have also been able to access, when they've needed to, food parcels, as well as, you know, from the local food bank as well. So there has been a range of support there. And I think one thing I was kind of wanted to kind of clarify as well, where, you know, obviously Argyll and Bute have spoken a lot about, you know, the partnership working and collaborations that they've had. I've not touched on that so much with Moray, but I think that's really because when we set up the scheme, our service had already had really good and I'm not saying that wasn't the case in Argyll, of course, but we already had really good partnership working. We had our own local poverty group of partners, and we had already these kind of links established, which actually, you know, made it, you know, it gave us such a really good grounding to then move forward into a cash first approach, because we had already had those links. And also when we were working with people, we were able to refer people for other specialist support, whether it was housing, whether it was mental health services, because that featured a lot, obviously, fuel and, you know, food and all of the other kind of partnership we work with as well. So although we've had a slightly different approach than Argyll, I think overall we've kind of done the same thing. We've just kind of gone at it at different times. And obviously, I mean, a lot of what we've done has been in-house within the council, because we had a well-established money advice team within the council. I know a lot of local authorities don't necessarily have that, and they do have to rely on third parties, but Argyll has shown that works, even though you don't have an in-house service, and that works really well.
Amazing, thanks Norma. Julie, if I can ask you to come in there on the most significant change that you have seen aside from the money and the numbers.
One of the things that the food banks raised with me was that they could give out the food parcels, and obviously they could work with the council, and those food parcels were going out, and that was wonderful. But delivery of advice services around that, they were concerned about. They wanted a parity of service. And we felt very passionately about that too. It shouldn't matter where you live. You should be able to get a really good money advice service and welfare rights support. So we started off with a big publicity campaign and got lots of applications in, but we did see that there wasn't a parity of service. Some of the areas that were more densely populated, of course, we would have expected to see more applications. But we were worried that smaller places like Colonsay and Col and Tiree, Isla, Mull, there weren't the numbers that we wanted. And we decided we needed to do something about that. So through the Flexible Fund, we managed to get funding for staff to physically go. We were very careful about doing that, because obviously we're in the midst of a pandemic, but we were very careful, and we went out not to speak to the individuals themselves, the applicants, but to speak to partner organisations, so health visitors and teachers and midwives, health visitors, those kind of groups. Because if we tell them, they can tell lots of people, whereas if I'm helping someone with an application, I can only help that one person. So we wanted to really make it worth our while. So we went to all of these remote locations, which was wonderful. I went to lots of places I'd never been to before. We were able to really highlight it. And one of the tools that we used was the Money Worries leaflet, because on the Money Worries leaflet, there's a whole section on the Flexible Food Fund, and that's what we were highlighting. So we weren't being precious just about our service. Of course, all of the advice services in Argyll and Bute are mentioned on that. So it was basically just about giving people an access way, so they could use us or they could use someone else, but it was about trying to make sure that no matter where you were, and the food banks themselves were saying that there was a real reaction to that. It was really successful. The other thing that we've also done is we've tapped in where people do have mental health problems. We have tapped into Acumen services, and we do try to offer a bit of a listening ear service, but we're not counsellors. That's not what we are. So where we feel that someone does really need that extra support, of course there's the mental health teams and CPNs and so on, but it's also been lovely to be able to refer to Acumen as well. And one of the things, because this is a moving feast all the time, you know, we're constantly adapting, and the latest initiative is that we've got a survey that we're using with our clients to ask about how this service is affecting their mental health. Is it having any impact at all? And if it is, you know, in what ways? And we're trying to capture that. It's in its infancy at the moment, but we're hoping that as the months are going on, we'll capture some really valuable information on that as well. The thing is, we want to make sure that there's nobody out there that's vulnerable, and we're leaving no stone unturned and trying to use our local contacts to really boost publicity around this project.
That's amazing. Thanks, Julie. Jenny, you want to add anything to that, or could I move on to the next question? Awesome. So I guess the tricky one is, what were the challenges? Like, what did you rub up against? What were the tricky bits? Because I think for a lot of people who are maybe wanting to try stuff like this, that's the worry, isn't it? It's like, what were the problems and how did you overcome them? So Norma, if you wanted to start with the challenges that you might have faced.
Yeah, I mean, when we started back at the beginning of May 2020, I mean, who knew this was going to go on as long as it has? And at that point in time, we created this food, an alternative, an opportunity for people to have alternative support to the Food Plus, because the food bank in Moray, because we knew that they were going to be completely overstretched and overwhelmed. If that was the only kind of source of food insecurity. So we created it, obviously, say back in April and May last year, and not with the vision that it was going to last as long as it did. So we put together the plan and probably thought, we're probably quite smug with ourselves, thinking, oh, this is going to be really good, and it was, and it's been really successful. But what I would say is, the resources that that are involved, and the demand that has come from providing a cash first approach as well, you have to take those factors into considerations, and they have been difficult to manage. I mean, money advice service, we probably not have had in excess of 700 people over a 6 months period, and then yet another 700 people over a further 6 months people, with only a quarter of that being the same household. So obviously, the pandemic itself obviously put people in a situation where they were in some circumstances very desperate, and the cash first approach was very appealing to people. So it created a demand that at times, I have to say, did overwhelm the team that we have in place. There's no getting away from it. And when we opened the winter scheme last year, it was just before Christmas time as well. And I was really concerned about the impact that was going to have on the service, and also the impact that was going to have on the people we're trying to support, with it being Christmas time and then into a new year where the temperatures are a lot colder and people have less money. So yes, I mean, as I say, I think a lot of that does come down to the fact that we just didn't have a crystal ball to see what was going to come in front of us. And, you know, if we did have, we would have probably put more resources in place from the get-go to try and manage that. And also the staff that we have, as I said, the staff that we have managing the money and the budget are the same staff that are dealing with the money advice and income maximisation, because we do have criteria in there about who's entitled to receive the flexible food fund. And it's fairly discretionary, but we do obviously look that people are in a situation where they're either entitled to means tested benefits, or, you know, they're an underlying entitlement to means tested benefits if they've already got there, because we're not in the situation that we can establish, you know, do our own calculation to see and set our own eligibility criteria. So we were kind of using that, which is fair enough to do that. But you need staff who know what they're doing with that as well. You need staff that have really good awareness of, you know, income maximisation and the welfare benefits system that's out there, to ensure that are not only people getting the money, that they're also getting the right support. So I would probably say that one of the biggest probably pressures has been around, you know, the use of resources and getting the right people in to do the right job. And I think that's a really important consideration for people. And I know Argyll do it slightly different because they have the crossover between the council and, you know, there's the support services. But again, even looking from getting physical payments out, you have to have an infrastructure there that can actually put out bank payments to people. It's public funded money. You have to have, you know, it's, you know, it has to be accountable. You have to have an audit process in place as well. Yeah. So all these kind of governance things as well, you know, they do have to be carefully considered. Yeah. But I'll stop talking now. Let Argyll get in.
It's important to think all these things through, and you're right. Like, if you want to, when everyone decides this is the right thing to do, which they will, they also need to be able to figure out, if you want to invest in this cash first approach, it's not just the money that you're giving out that you need to invest in, it's everything else that goes around that. And that's important to talk about. Jane and Julie, if you can tag team on this next bit for a couple of minutes, and then we'll kick into some questions from the chat, if that's okay. So it's just about the challenges, please.
Yeah, I'll come in first if that's all right. Just a couple of comments at the back of what Norma has said there. You're absolutely right about resource. For us, it was slightly different because we were transitioning out of one set of projects and into another. And it was at a time, obviously, when schools were coming back last August, September. So we were busy trying to juggle all the plates and make sure we still continue to provide the support to those. And there was no additional resource available to do that. So we were at the stage where we were having, you know, 2 full-time jobs sometimes, but we were determined to make sure that this worked. So resource is definitely a part of it. And Fergus Walker, my colleague, the Revenue and Benefits Manager, who does all the work, I'm just here taking the credit. His team are the ones doing payments for children entitled to free school meals. So they were processing all of those payments, plus we're trying to establish a system like this, which, as Norma says, takes time to establish and get set up. So we need to think quite closely about what that resource looks like as we were doing it, but also what that needs to look like as we look to the future. Julie, I know, has touched on the comms side of it and making sure we've got that message out to our very remote, rural and island communities, and they've done a fantastic job of doing that. And for me, it's really now a matter of how we keep it going, because as we've heard from Ellie and Chelsea earlier, this demand is not going to disappear. And the funding, although it's very welcome, is very much, you know, allocations for a period of time. For us to make this sustainable in the long term, we need to be planning in the long term, and that also includes planning resource for ourselves and for our third sector partners like Julie.
Brilliant. Julie, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I know you're pushed for time. That's fine.
It was an open question. It was an open question. So, yeah, I think Chelsea's going to pick up on some of the questions from the chat so we can make sure we try and cover as much as we can. Chelsea?
Perfect. Thanks so much, Annie. It draws really heavily on what Jane was just mentioning, actually. There's been a couple of questions about the sustainability of cash first responses. And since these are a couple of different models where what you've used is the flexibility within the Scottish Government's funding to help people draw down so much additional resource from within existing benefit system. I wanted you to talk a little bit about the cost benefit analysis from your perspective as a council, what it's taken from your resources, what is needed to make this more sustainable. But I don't want to lose that bit that we started with at the start, around 750 families drawing down £1 million of additional resource. There is a real knock-on effect to the payments that you're making, and that's what's so inspiring about these schemes. Is so anyway, I'll let you go ahead and answer that, but it's that point around sustainability, and Jane, you've already started touching on some of that in terms of what you would need in your context. So maybe Norma, and then back to Jane and Julie, if that works.
Yeah, I mean, it's really an interesting point that, you know, the cost-effective analysis there really, and that's not something that we've been able to actually really look at, because we have, like everybody else, have been firefighting at the front end of all of this, and have not just had the opportunity to draw breath, take stock, because we've had that service up and running since the beginning of the pandemic. So we've not had a point where we've just, you know, gone from one scheme into another scheme and been able to actually sit and consider, you know, is this better than what we had before or not, the pros and the cons and the costs and all the rest of it. We went in from the very beginning with this scheme, and you know, it has, you know, worked very well in Moray. As I say, there are pros and cons with everything that you go into there. And yeah, I mean, in terms of sustainability, that's always been a concern. I think after about the first 6 months of the Flexible Food Fund in Moray, I have had lots of conversations with the Scottish Government over the last 18 months or so. And as much as we were getting, you know, good feedback on our cash first approach, I was always saying that, yes, that, you know, that's great to have that feedback. It reassures us that, you know, that we're sort of moving in the right direction. But also we have to really carefully consider, you know, how we can actually sustain this level of production of payments, of money advice, and, you know, as well. And I think a lot of that is really something that the Scottish Government are going to have very careful consideration about. It's fantastic that we're getting funding from the Scottish Government, and there's a new winter funding as well. But, you know, just throwing money at local authorities to put these things in place as individual local authorities, and you know, the money that we're getting is grant funding. You know, it's not in terms of administration costs. So where does the administration funding come from, you know, for you know, setting up a cash first approach? That's key, you know, because we can say here today, you know, with ourselves and Argyll and Moray, with having the experience that we have so far, we have both said, you know, it is resource intensive. But we went into it not knowing what you know, how long this was going to last. If the Scottish Government are looking at a more permanent solution for this, a cash first approach, and obviously off the back of the consultation around food banks as well, and the ending of food banks, there has to be a very careful look at the administration, the resources that it takes to actually provide that type of service in each local authority. And that's really important as well, to make sure that, you know, that each local authority does, you know, if this is something we're all going to end up doing in the future, that it doesn't become a postcode lottery, that all local authorities can provide a reasonable service in terms of this, and it shouldn't be down to where you live, to what, you know, whether you're going to get a, you know, a kind of okay service or a really good service. So that the administration and the costs around administration is key to the sustainability of that service. And that is one of my biggest messages, I think, for the Scottish Government. I'd also have a message to the Scottish Government that in terms of money advice services, I would really urge them that they need to be made statutory services, because again, that is a key factor as to why some local authority areas have more advice support in their local area to others. And in terms of child poverty agenda, money advice and income maximisation is mentioned, is littered all over their policy documents. However, there's not that sustainable support there, and that's really needing a good look at, and if these services were made statutory services, it doesn't matter whether they're in-house council services or whether they're third sector services. If they were made statutory, that would potentially provide a really good baseline for what could be offered across the whole of Scotland. I'll go off my soapbox now.
Julie, Jane, do you want to come in there on your...
Yeah, I just wanted to make the point that obviously short-term funding is always an issue, it's always a problem. And in order for agencies like ours, and it would be the same for councils, in order to bring somebody in and train them up to be a welfare rights officer, someone who's really competent to be able to work right through, to appeals level, and also money advisors for them to become DAS approved and all the rest of it, it takes time, and you invest a lot of money in their training. And short-term funding is always a problem, because what do you offer? Do you offer short-term contracts? Who wants that? People want security. So, and that's what we want for our staff as well. We want to invest in them with the training, but we want to offer them a longevity of service with us. So, I'm always looking months ahead, a year ahead, at what's our finances like next year. So I have to say that I do kind of beaver away in Jane and Fergus's ear about, what's happening, what are we doing? And I know they don't always have the immediate answers, but that's why the Scottish Government, just like Norma's saying, they have to have a sort of a plan that is not just a quick fix. It's something that's a little bit more long term, because we have the skills, we have the expertise, and in places like Argyll and Bute, welfare rights officers and money advisors, they're thin on the ground. So the ones we have got, we absolutely want to retain them. We want to retain that expertise, and the only way we can do that is by giving them jobs with a bit of sustainability, and obviously that has a knock-on effect on our communities. By having those relationships built, then people know where the services are, and then they can come back to us. So as they are facing difficulties, as Norma said, when you've got clients that perhaps do have various issues and they come back to you year on year, then it's good for them to know where the services are, and they can come back to us because we know that we're there for the duration. Bute Advice Centre has been in operation now for, I think it's 37 years. So we've no intentions of going anywhere, but we want to make sure that right across that service, right across Argyll and Bute, that parity of service can be sustained in the long term as well.
Jane, do you want to have a quick 30-second bash there to add anything in, or are you all good?
All good. The only thing I would say is yes, as Ellie knows, if you're still in the call, I'd emailed about this very issue this morning about creation of posts and how we make that more sustainable. So it's very much a live issue for us.
I think Ellie's going to come in there, if you can, Ellie.
Would love to come in just for a sec, if that's okay. And sorry for the technical issues I was having earlier. It seems to be a thing that happens at around that time of day. So thank you very much. I just wanted to say, hearing those messages that Norma and Jane and Julie are sharing, and really welcoming those really direct, crisp reflections on learning and what we can do to improve the offer, because ultimately that's what this discussion is about. That's what the National Plan on Ending the Need for Food Banks is about. And there are other sectoral opportunities like review of money advice services, review of the Scottish Welfare Fund. So I think we're here, we're listening, and that's kind of exactly where we hope to get to, all of us, in terms of improving the landscape and really reducing hardship at source, but also improving the responses to it. Just wanted to confirm that there is flexibility in the Winter Support Fund to cover administration costs, because that is a very specific question that's been asked here today. So I wanted to give that assurance that that is possible. And also just wanted to finish with a reflection from me that so many extraordinary things have happened over the last couple of years, and they've happened because of people having determination and working incredibly hard. So I think we can't say it enough. All of the impact is because of people's hard work, and I think everyone is incredibly grateful for that. So thank you, Julie, Norma and Jane, for all that you've done, and everyone else participating in these discussions, for all that you're continuing to do.
Thank you so much to our panel speakers today. Just so much good vibe, so much hard work, and I could just hear all these alternative approaches, thinking outside the box, doing things differently, because we cannot carry on the way that we have in the past.